Hi everyone, this is Dr. Nitin Chhoda and welcome to this episode of Ignition Time. In this video, I'll talk to you about the battle between stimulus and inflation. Now, I know there's a lot of information out there regarding stimulus, regarding inflation, but I want to be the first channel that actually ties the two together because it's really important for us to understand this and what guides the decision-making process for individuals like the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell, for President Biden, because remember, presidents have normally listened to economists and advisors who are like, oh, be careful about inflation. Before I get into all of that, folks, welcome to my channel. This channel, the Ignition Time channel, is about the country, it's about the economy, and it's about your money. If you learn something new from this channel, please consider clicking the like button, please subscribe, please enable notifications. That really helps out the YouTube algorithm, and I would really appreciate that. So, folks, let's understand what is inflation. When there's a surge in demand for products and services, then prices go up because more people are willing to pay more for the same thing. So if there was a surge for toilet paper, for example, surge of demand, you would see the price of toilet paper go up, and this is something that we have seen in the past year. Inflation is something that can lead to massive price increases, that can lead to a weakening of the currency, that can lead to long-term trade implications. Let me just keep it simple and say inflation is bad. Back in the 1970s, the United States saw a significant amount of inflation, and that is something that all presidents since then are very careful about and are very concerned about and are very nervous about. They want to try and not have too much inflation. Normal inflation is about 2% a year. So basically prices go up by about 2% every year. So let's say you're paying $4, just as an example, for a gallon of milk. Next year you can be expected to pay $4.08 or $4.10. That's just an example. Some goods and services are subjected to more inflation, some are subjected to less, because all of this has to do with supply and demand. Now, one reason there are a lot of opponents, there are a lot of detractors to President Biden's massive $1.9 trillion stimulus package. One concern is the risk of inflation. In fact, Larry Summers, who was an advisor to former President Barack Obama, said that there could be a risk of inflation and that this was too much money. Remember, if there's too much money injected into the system, people now have more money and people can then essentially go out and buy more goods and services, and that can lead to inflation. That is the number one concern of individuals who are against the $1.9 trillion stimulus package. But folks, inflation assumes that what has happened in the past is likely to happen in the future. I believe that human behavior has a lot to do with the risks of inflation. And what's very clear as a result of this pandemic is that individuals in travel, leisure, entertainment, and hospitality have been impacted the worst. This, as you know, is a K-shaped recovery. Individuals at the top of the K are doing just fine. Individuals at the bottom of the K have been left behind like a train leaving the station. I believe that when money reaches those who need it the most, they'll spend it so that they can put food on the table, so they can make rent, so they can pay their bills, whereas other individuals will end up saving it. This, in a very strange way, may actually prevent us from having more inflation, because it doesn't mean that everybody's going to rush out and buy clothes at the same time, or everybody's going to rush into a restaurant at the same time. Human behavior has a lot to do with this. Also, the pandemic is gradually improving at different rates in different parts of the country. Also, the rate at which vaccines are rolling out is different at different parts of the country. It's not like come Memorial Day weekend, we're all going to go to restaurants and we're all going to be hanging out. It's not going to happen because the uneven nature of this recovery, both from a financial and economic standpoint, which is where I talked to you about the K-shaped recovery, about certain sectors being hit the most, the fact that there is essentially an uneven financial and economic recovery, the fact that all of us have different behavior, and finally, the fact that this pandemic is improving at different rates across the country essentially is a backstop. It's protection. It's our insurance policy against inflation because we don't live in normal times. Let's try and understand what exactly inflation is in a normal world and how a government can actually respond to inflation by raising interest rates. Remember, throughout the history of the United States of America, or for that matter any country, a country goes through an economic expansion, then it goes through a recession. Expansion, recession. We went through a long period of economic expansion and then we had a sudden recession because of the pandemic. Now we are looking at another period of sustained expansion, and the recession is unlikely to happen for the next few years, especially if we have the $1.9 trillion stimulus. And when you consider the battle between inflation and the $1.9 trillion stimulus package, you'll see that the $1.9 trillion stimulus package is unlikely to cause inflation because of the factors I mentioned. Let's actually take a look at how inflation happens, how governments try to combat it, and how the cycle of inflation, expansion, and even a recession occurs in a normal world, from hedge fund manager Ray Dalio in a phenomenal video called How the Economic Machine Works. I'll show you a small clip of that video right now, and I'll provide you with a link to that entire video in the description section below. Let's hear from hedge fund manager Ray Dalio on how inflation works and how it's usually followed by deflation. But I have to tell you that I believe in the world that we live in, it's not quite going to play out this way, but I do want you to understand how inflation works in a normal world. Let's roll the tape and hear from Ray Dalio.
As economic activity increases, we see an expansion, the first phase of the short-term debt cycle. Spending continues to increase and prices start to rise. This happens because the increase in spending is fueled by credit, which can be created instantly out of thin air. When the amount of spending and incomes grow faster than the production of goods, prices rise. When prices rise, we call this inflation. The central bank doesn't want too much inflation because it causes problems. Seeing prices rise, it raises interest rates. With higher interest rates, fewer people can afford to borrow money, and the cost of existing debts rises. Think about this as the monthly payments on your credit card going up. Because people borrow less and have higher debt repayments, they have less money left over to spend, so spending slows. And since one person's spending is another person's income, incomes drop, and so on and so forth. When people spend less, prices go down. We call this deflation. Economic activity decreases, and we have a recession. If the recession becomes too severe and inflation is no longer a problem, the central bank will lower interest rates to cause everything to pick up again. With low interest rates, debt repayments are reduced and borrowing and spending pick up, and we see another expansion.
Now, that was an interesting video. Speaking of interesting, folks, here's a headline on your screen, an article from the Washington Post that reads, Biden and the Fed leave 1970s inflation fears behind. Again, we have to do unusual things out of the ordinary in an abnormal world, which is what we live in. And you see the article and it reads, administration and Fed officials argue that workers not getting enough stimulus help is a larger concern than potential spikes in consumer prices. In other words, I should say to get back to normal employment levels, to bring the unemployment rate back down and to help people while they're unemployed is a bigger priority for the Federal Reserve, and it should be a bigger priority for the Federal Reserve than being worried about risks of inflation. I've highlighted 3 reasons why I think inflation is unlikely to happen. I've highlighted the difference in the financial and economic factors. I've highlighted differences in human behavior, and I've highlighted the uneven nature of the pandemic recovery. Now, in this fascinating article, by the way, again, I'll provide you with a link to the article in the description section below. It reads, presidents who find themselves digging out of recessions have long heeded the warnings of inflation-obsessed economists who fear that acting aggressively to stimulate a struggling economy will bring a return of the monstrous price increases that plagued the nation in the 1970s. Now, as President Biden presses ahead with the American Rescue Plan, he and his top economic advisors are brushing aside those concerns, as is the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell. After years of dire inflation predictions that have failed to pan out, the people who run fiscal and monetary policy, and by the way, this includes Janet Yellen, folks. Janet Yellen, the new US Treasury Secretary, has spent years studying inflation, and now she's been essentially voicing the same opinion as President Biden, which is that we need to do more. We need to do more. And so the insiders in Washington, the decision makers, have decided the risk of overheating the economy is much lower than the risk of not failing to heat it up enough. Here's a comment from the new US Treasury Secretary Janet Yellen, and she said this to a news network earlier this month. She said, I have spent many years studying inflation and worrying about inflation, but we face a huge economic challenge here and tremendous suffering in the country. We have got to address that. That's the biggest risk. Now, it's very clear that Larry Summers, former economic advisor to President Barack Obama and an economist at Harvard, disagrees with Janet Yellen. And here's a quote from Larry Summers. He said that judged relative to either the macroeconomic output gap or declines in family income, the proposed relief package appears very large. Basically, what he's saying is, it's too big. We don't need it to be that big. The pain is not that great. That's basically what he's saying. And Summers also said there's a chance that the American rescue plan from President Biden will, I quote, set off inflationary pressures of a kind we have not seen in a generation. So what does the Federal Reserve Chairman Jerome Powell and the decision makers at the Federal Reserve, what do they have to say? Well, they released a framework. I'll show you the framework on your screen right now. You can read the whole thing, which is quite boring. I'll simply give you the bottom line. The bottom line is that their framework calls for policymakers to look for a period of above 2% inflation for an extended period of time before they take any decisions to raise interest rates and to bring inflation back down. In short, they're saying, so what? If it goes up a little bit, we'll just wait and see if it remains high consistently, and then we'll make changes. There's nothing to be worried about right now. This is completely different from prior economic policies, which basically say, oh, as soon as inflation goes up, we need to raise interest rates. Also, here's another headline on your screen from the New York Times, which reads, Fed chair sets stage for longer periods of lower rates. Jerome Powell said that the central bank would focus its efforts on fostering a strong labor market while tolerating higher inflation. One of the mandates of the Federal Reserve is to make sure that people are employed. That, by the way, is one of the things the Federal Reserve is responsible for. And they are saying, okay, we'll make sure that the labor market recovers and then we'll worry about inflation later. In other words, they are simply changing their priorities. Their priority used to be inflation and then the strong labor market. Now those priorities have flipped, and now it is labor market and then inflation. In other words, the stimulus and getting the labor market to be strong again is a higher priority than worrying about inflation. They feel that inflation is not going to be a concern. So that's it, everybody. That's a pretty interesting difference of opinion. Folks, economically, this is very important for economists and decision makers and politicians. But for you and for me, it's about a check in the mail. For you, it's about being able to put food on the table, being able to keep the lights on, being able to pay rent. For you, it's about getting your job back. So I just want to be clear. I am in favor of large stimulus for people who need it the most. I've been saying this for months on my channel. I've been saying that going back to when the CARES Act was passed. So my position hasn't changed. But I'm trying to help our viewers and subscribers understand what these decision makers consider and how it plays a role in your day-to-day life. This channel is about the country, the economy, and about your money. If you learn something new, please click the like button, please subscribe, please enable notifications. That would mean a lot to me personally. I would really appreciate that. Thank you so much for watching. I'm looking forward to seeing you in the next episode of Ignition Time. Take care. Bye.